When I'm thinking about proving that Christianity is true, one of the best case studies that we can do is actually of the Apostle Paul. So to begin, his story goes that he was raised as a Pharisee, which if you didn't know is probably the strictest sect of the Jewish religion. Paul had memorized probably the whole what we would consider to be Old Testament, and he knew the law in and out. He actually lists his qualifications for being a good Jew in the Bible on multiple occasions. In Philippians, he says, if anyone has confidence to put in the flesh or in themselves, I have more. He says he was born of the tribe of Benjamin, a Hebrew of Hebrews, circumcised on the 8th day, as regards for the law, faultless. So he had studied and perfected his walk as a Jew, and he had actually raised in the ranks so high that he was just below some of the highest ranking leaders of his time and was given authority by them. But at his time when he seems for his career and his religion to be going great, he gives it all away to become a Christian. Then he is persecuted and almost killed on numerous times, and at the end of his life, he actually is put into prison and then finally killed for his faith. So why would he do that without a true conviction of the resurrection of Jesus Christ? He had no motivation to become a Christian and every motivation to persecute them. But then he seems to have had a true encounter with Jesus that turned him to becoming a Christian. Furthermore, Paul in the book of 1 Corinthians writes the Apostles' Creed. The Apostles' Creed talks about Jesus being resurrected from the dead, and Corinthians was written before the 4 gospel accounts. So Paul's account of the Apostles' Creed would actually be the first written evidence for the resurrection of Jesus. What's interesting to me is that Paul seems to be the perfect person to go and witness to the Jews. However, God says that he's called to go to the Gentiles, and he's very effective at doing this. And something that we can learn from Paul in his life, and something I want to live in my life, is not doing what seems right to me, but instead what seems right to God. Because when Paul is put forth in front of King Agrippa and Festus, he's able to witness to them about his faith. And they actually call him crazy for doing so. They don't believe anything that he's saying. See, Paul was insanely effective at witnessing to Gentiles because they were desperate for salvation and for God. It was a harvest in his ministry. But when he goes and tries to have intellectual debates with Jewish people, they tend to get lost in the weeds of the prophecy and the law and look for any reason to reject Paul and consider him crazy. To me, Paul's life demonstrates the realness of the resurrection of Jesus, because there's no motivation for him to become a Christian, and yet he still does. There's no motivation for him to stay a Christian through all of his persecution, and yet he still does. And finally, there's no motivation for him to die for his faith, and yet he still does. If Jesus had not resurrected from the dead and then appeared to Paul the apostle, the story of how he became and followed Christ makes no sense. Therefore, I think Paul and his life and his ministry is one of the strongest cases that we have for the resurrection of Jesus.